Hello everybody, welcome to Jury Central online classes for law exams. So today I will be dealing with you the recently held National Law Aptitude Test 2020 PG questions. This exam has been conducted by NLSIU after it detached itself from the consortium of CLAT. So the exam was held on 12th of September 2020 and today it released its answer key along with question paper. So if you want to download the answer key, I would share the link in the description box below. So first of all, let us see what is the pattern of the paper. So according to their official notification, it says that the questions will be asked from constitutional law, jurisprudence, administrative law, law of contract, torts, family law, criminal law, property law, company law, public international law, tax law, environmental law, and labor law and industrial law. And the scheme of exam, but if I talk about the scheme of this present exam, what their notification actually said that there will be 3 passages, questions that are extract from Supreme Court judgments in prominent cases. But if I talk about the present exam which have been held just a day back, there 3 questions were asked, in which 2 questions have been asked. They were extracts from Supreme Court judgments in prominent cases, and one of the question was actually relating to jurisprudence. So and let us see about the marking scheme. So their marking scheme is bit complicated for all new candidates, because we haven't even witnessed such kind of complicated marking scheme which says that 2 marks per correct answer would be awarded. But here even for unanswered questions marks will be deducted. This will actually will be a loss to your total marks, because it's totally a different concept and you only have the option of either take it or leave it. That is how their question paper is actually framed. But if I talk about the level of questions, they are you can say I will say moderate level, easy to moderate level. There are 2 questions which have been asked from Supreme Court judgments. Those questions are not actually those answers of the questions were not given in the passage itself. So for answering those questions, you need, if you had already gone through the judgment, then it is very easy for you to answer those questions. But if you have not, you would face it a little bit of difficult. And in terms of the jurisprudence, the passage which have been asked from jurisprudence, you would find the answer of the questions in the passage itself. But as you know that the language of jurisprudence is a little bit of complicated, and so that is why you have to apply your own minds and your own intelligence in answering this question. So I'll tell you how to find the answers of this question in the passage itself. So let us start with our first question. So this is the passage 1. I am reading over to you. You just listen to me carefully. Custom and priestly law on the one hand and bureaucratic regulations on the other divided the social world into 2 halves. So these 2 things have actually divided the social world into 2 halves. The first, more or less beyond the prince's command, that means beyond, or you say beyond the king's command, or the second, subject to this or to his almost unlimited discretion. But there is a third concept of law. So, and the third concept of law is actually called legal order or legal system, the author is saying. So first of all, I tell you where the passage has been taken. So this passage has been taken from Ungar's celebrated book which is known as Law in Modern Society Towards a Criticism of Social Theory. Well, the author is not very new to you, as the questions have already been asked from the same text in the previous year CLAT LLM entrance test. I have already told the question in my done videos. You can check that. Okay. So let us see the next page. Autonomy has a substantive and institutional, methodological and an occupational aspect. Law is autonomous in a substantive sense when the rules formulated and enforced by government cannot be persuasively analyzed as a mere restatement of an identifiable set of non-legal belief or norms, be they economic, political or religious. So So they are telling that when law could be considered as autonomous in a substantive sense, when the rules formulated and enforced by government cannot be persuasively analyzed as a mere restatement of any identifiable set of non-legal beliefs or norms, which are, the author is saying, economic, political or religious. More specifically, an autonomous legal system doesn't codify a particular theology. So they are actually, in this para, the author is actually elaborating that what should be called as an autonomous legal system. So it actually doesn't codify a particular theology. That means rules set on on religious beliefs. Then as a body of profane rules, it stands apart from the precepts that govern man's relationship to God and from any single religious view, social relations that I have already told you just now. Law is institutionally autonomous to the extent that its rules are applied by specialized institutions whose main task is adjudication. So in this para, the author is actually saying that the courts which applies decisions are independent in nature. Thus, the distinction between society and state and society is complemented by a contrast within the state itself among legislation, administration and adjudication. So, author is also telling the distinction between state and policy, which is complemented within the state itself among legislation, administration and adjudication, that means judiciary. Law is autonomous at the methodological level when the ways in which the specialized institutions justify their acts differ from the kinds of justification used in other disciplines or practices. So here the other disciplines or practices the author mean relating to economic, political or religious. This means that legal reasoning has a method or style to differentiate it from scientific explanation and from moral, political and economic discourse, just now I told you. Lastly, the legal order is characterized by occupational autonomy. So the main characteristic of legal order is its occupational autonomy. A special group, the legal profession, defined by its activities, prerogatives and training, manipulates the rules, staffs the legal institution and engages in the practice of legal argument. Substantive, institutional, methodological and occupational autonomy are independent. So these three things are independent in nature. They are all dependent of each other. That means, moreover, taken together, they give a special significance to the ideal of generality in lawmaking and uniformity in the application of law. So the author is saying that the lawmaking is actually an ideal of generality and it's uniform in the application of law. Bureaucratic law may consist either of rules with a wide scope or of commands addressed to situations narrowly defined in space and time. So bureaucratic law may consist either of rules or with a wide scope or of commands. But a legal order differs from politics and administration precisely because of its attachment to the aim. So in this para, what the author says, how the legal order is actually different from bureaucratic law. Because of its attachment to the aims of generality in legislation and of uniformity in adjudication. So it is actually, its aim is actually generalizing in legislation and actually to adjudicate in uniform manner. The laws are expected to address broadly defined categories of individuals when acts and to be applied without personal or class favoritism. So when the laws is actually expected to address broadly, so when it applies without any personal or class favoritism, that means without any favoritism or nepotism. Whereas generality can never be more than a matter of expediency in bureaucratic law. That means the nature of generality is not, it is not inbuilt in bureaucratic law. It acquires special significance in the context of legal system. So it actually acquires its special significance from the legal system. For it is a generality of law that establishes a formal equality of the citizens and thereby shields them from arbitrary tutelage of government. So what they are telling that for a bureaucratic law, what actually the generality of law means. Administration must be separated from legislation to ensure generality. So for ensuring generality, administration has to be separated from legislation. Both cannot be taken on the same footing. Adjudication must be distinguished from administration. Adjudication to safeguard uniformity, and as well as adjudication, that means judiciary, must also be distinguished from administration to safeguard uniformity, so that the laws applies to all the citizens. These two contrasts represent the core of the rule of law ideal. So these two contrasts means actually administration and adjudication both are opposite in nature, and this contrast, what the author is saying, this is the contrast which represents the rule of law ideal. Through them, the legal system is supposed to become the balance wheel of social organization. So the last para, like I have already told you, that a question related to this text has already been asked in the previous year examination. So there the question is asked that to whom do you associate the legal system is supposed to become the balance wheel of social organization. I have already dealt with that question. Question number 1. Based on the information in the passage above, which of the following is Ungar's most likely to agree with? So the correct option is option number C. A legal system emphasizes the generality of laws, whereas these or may not be the case in bureaucratic law. Like I have already told you, I have already shown you here that bureaucratic law may consist either of rules with a wider scope of command addressed to situations narrowly defined in space and time. But a legal order differs from politics and administration precisely because of its attachment to the aims of generality in legislation and of uniformity in adjudication. I hope you understood. Second, in a society X, Sundays are generally regarded as holidays. Even though there is no specific rule articulated by the rulers of the society that this should be so, offices and schools are shut and people do not venture out for official purposes on Sundays. The exact reason why Sundays have come to be regarded as holidays in society X is unknown. So what the para is saying, that in society X, Sundays are generally considered as holidays. But why Sundays considered as the holidays, but why not the other, other weekdays? It is actually unknown. But it is commonly held belief that the word of a widely revered deity prescribes Sundays as a time for rest and recovery. So the author is actually, the para is actually tracing its origin from a religious belief that maybe a widely revered deity prescribes Sundays as a time for rest and recovery. Which of the following best describes the rule regarding Sundays being a holiday in society X? So in this, the correct option is, because the belief of a widely revered deity is concerned, then the correct answer would be option number A, because it is actually relating to religious and customary law. Question number 3. Based on the arguments in the passage above, can the rule regarding Sundays in society X be regarded as emanating from a legal order or legal system? Option number B. No, since it has theological roots and social agreements and is not backed by a positive pronouncement. This has already been given in the passage itself, that I would tell you that law is autonomous, and more specifically an autonomous legal system doesn't codify particular theology. So the legal system is actually not tracing its origin or doesn't support the idea of theology. That is the reason why in option number 3, option B is correct. Question number 4. Which of the following would Ungar agree demonstrate the institutional autonomy of a legal system? So the correct option is option number D, an independent court system that adjudicates legal disputes. I have already told you in the passage itself while reading the passage. Question number 5. Which among the following, if true, would most weaken Ungar's arguments in the passage above? The correct option is option number C. The methods used by legal institutions to justify their actions in a methodological autonomous legal systems are identical to those employed by scientists and economists. No, this is totally incorrect. Both the fields are different. Legal institutions who actually adjudicate, that means they are talking about judiciary, are not, their system, the legal system are not identical as those employed by scientists and economists. I'll show you which para it is given. here. 3. Law is I have already made the para in bold. Law is autonomous at the methodological level when the ways in which the specialized institutions justify their acts differ from the kinds of justification used in other discipline or practices. This means that legal reasoning has a method or style to differentiate it from scientific explanation and from moral, political and economic discourse. As the question suggests, like legal reasoning actually employs a different method of adjudication. It has nothing to do with the scientific explanation of moral, political and economic discourse. Discourse means debate. Okay. Question number 4. Which of the following would Unger agree demonstrates institutional autonomy of a legal system? So, okay, we have done this question, sorry. 6th. According to Unger, which of the following contrasts between legal system and bureaucratic law most comprehensively sets out the core of the rule of law? The aim of uniformity in adjudication, the special significance of generality in a legal system. So on these 2 points, legal system and bureaucratic law mostly comprehensively sets out the core of the rule of law, because these two systems actually differ on uniformity and as well as generality. That is actually the author says is the core of the rule of law. I have already told you in the passage. 7th, in Society X, the priest of the majority religion also decides disputes between members of the society. Disputants are represented in these matters by priests, economists, specialized engineers or others. Which of the following types of autonomy of a legal order described by Unger is violated in such a situation? The correct option is option number D. The author actually advocates about occupational autonomy, and that is the reason why it could be described by Unger as is actually a violation in such a situation. 8. The ruler of Society X passed a rule stating that all cars must be driven on the left side of the road on Sundays and on the right side of the road on all other days. Which of the following types of law as described by Unger would such a rule fall? So such type of rule would be called as bureaucratic law as well as a legal order or legal system, because it has the quality of both as a bureaucratic law and a legal order system. 9. The ruler of Society X promulgates a new rule, providing that anyone directed to do so by the ruler must serve in the armed forces of X for 2 years. No rules are articulated to describe how conscripts would be identified, but the ruler consistently identifies young people from a particular caste for conscription. So that means there is an inequality. Which of the following best describe why such a rule doesn't concord with the description of a legal order as described by Unger? So the correct option is option number C. The rule lacks generality and is prone to favoritism at the hands of the ruler. Legal order actually supports no favoritism, and it supports the idea of generality as well as uniformity of law, because the ruler consistently identifies young people from a particular caste for conscription. So this idea is not in concord with the description of a legal order as described by Unger in the passage. 10. Which among the following weaken Unger's argument in the passage above? So the correct option is none of the above, because the question is asking that weaken Unger's argument in the passage, because the statements are not actually weakening the arguments in the passage above. These are all essential statements, like or essential qualities say the formal equality of citizens is supported by independent adjudicated institutions. This is totally right. The formal equality of citizens required generality of laws, as I have already told you. This is also right. And the separation of administration from legislation is necessary for the generality of law. So these 3 things are not actually weakening, but it's actually supporting the Unger's argument in the passage. Passage 2. So this case is relating to the Ayodhya land title dispute case. So let me tell you before starting the passage, like I have already told you in the beginning of the video, like there are 2 case laws in which the questions are asked, but you won't find the answer of these questions in the passage itself. But if you are very well acquainted with the case laws, if you have studied the case law thoroughly, then you can answer these questions. But those questions are not of very, very difficult nature, and you must have read it in newspaper or have also heard in the news channel. So let us see what are those questions. First of all, let me read the para. This first appeal centered around a dispute between two religious communities, both of whom claim ownership over a piece of land measuring 1500 square yards in the town of Ayodhya. So the dispute is relating to the land measuring 1500 square yards which is situated in Ayodhya. The dispute property is of immense significance to Hindus and Muslims. The Hindu community claims it as the birthplace of Lord Rama and incarnation of Lord Vishnu. The Muslim community claims it as the site of the historic Babri Masjid built by the first Mughal Emperor Babur. So the passage is actually telling about how the land is significant to both the communities. The lands of our country have witnessed invasions and dissensions, yet they have assimilated into the idea of India everyone who sought their providence, whether they came as merchants, travelers or conquerors. The history and culture of this country have been home to quest for truth through the material, the political and spiritual. So this means the land has been home to many people who are associated with this country, and even for those people who came as merchant travelers or as conquerors, and also by political or by spiritual. This court is called upon to fulfill its adjudicatory function, where it is claimed that two quests for the truth impinge on the freedom of the other or violate the rule of law. So obviously the court is in the suit has been instituted to settle the issue of or say the truth behind whom the land actually belongs to. Then para number 2. So paras are taken from this judgment. The dispute in this appeals arises out of 4 regular suits which were instituted between 1950 and 1989. Before the Allahabad High Court, voluminous evidence, both oral and documentary, was laid, resulting in 3 judgments running the course of 4304 pages. The judgment is placed in challenge in the appeals. Okay. So this the judgment which have been rendered by Allahabad High Court have been challenged as an appeal to the Supreme Court. A suit was instituted in 1950 before the civil judge at Faizabad by Hindu worshipper Gopal Singh Visharad, seeking a declaration that according to his religion and custom he is entitled to offer prayer at the main Janambhumi temple near the idol. So they are saying that a suit was first instituted in the year 1950 before the civil judge at Faizabad, that he was actually seeking his right to offer prayers at the main Janambhumi temple near the idols. The Nirmohi Akhara represents a religious sect amongst the Hindus known as the Ramanandi Bairagis. The Nirmohis claim that they were at all material times in charge and management of the structure at the disputed site, which according to them was a temple until 29 December 1949. So what Nirmohi Akhara is telling, that they were in charge of the temple until 29th of December 1949, on which date an attachment was ordered under section 145 of the CRPC. So until the temple was attached under section 145, they were in charge of the management and affairs of the disputed site. In effect, they claim as shebets in service of the duty. So shebets, that means they are actually seeking the custody of the deity, managing its affairs and receiving offerings from devotees. There is a suit of 1959 for the management and charge of the temple. So like already told you, this excerpt of this judgment has been taken from the judicial decision called A.M. Siddique through legal representatives versus Mahant Suresh Das and others. Question number first. Let's see what are the questions. The decision of the Supreme Court in M. Siddique through LR versus Mahant Suresh Das and others, the Ayodhya title dispute case, which it is famously known as, was delivered per curiam Which among the following most accurately describes what per curiam means? So it means option number B, an opinion of an appellate court that doesn't specifically identify the author of the opinion. See, if you read the judgment, you would find no mentioning of the author in the judgment itself. So this is actually, so such kind of judgment is actually known as per curiam judgments. Question number 2. Which of the following most accurately describes the decision of the Allahabad High Court as regards title to the property in dispute in the Ayodhya title dispute case? The correct option is option number 1. A. The Allahabad High Court directed a 3-way bifurcation of the disputed side. This is totally correct. So what they are actually asking, that what was the decision that was actually given by Allahabad High Courts regarding the title to the property which was in dispute. So it actually trifurcated the land into 3 parts, 1/3 each, to the UP Sunni Central Board of Waqf, Shri Ram Virajman and Nirmohi Akhara. Option number A. 3. The Allahabad High Court transferred various suits to itself for trial, and the decision of the Allahabad High Court in this matter was challenged in appeal to the Supreme Court, leading to decision in the Ayodhya title dispute case. Of these suits, the suit filed by which of the following parties was held by the Supreme Court in the Ayodhya title dispute case as being beyond the prescribed period of limitation. See, there were few issues which Allahabad High Court called in for trial by itself, and the decisions which actually came after the trial was challenged in the Supreme Court as an appeal to Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court actually held those appeal beyond the prescribed period of limitation. So who was the body who actually challenged the decision of the Allahabad High Court? So the correct option is option number D, Nirmohi Akhara. 4. What was the decision of the Supreme Court in the Ayodhya title dispute case as regards whether the suit filed by Mahant Raghuvat Das in 1885 had the effect of bringing about a bar on suit 5 filed by Shri Ram Virajman and Asthan Shri Janambhumi Ayodhya by a next friend because of the application of the principle of res judicata? So the question before the Supreme Court was whether the suit filed by Mahant Raghuvat Das in 1885, way back in 1885, do have the effect of res judicata or a subsequent suit which is termed as suit number 5 and filed by Shri Ram Virajman and so and so. So the court says option number A, the court held that the principle of res judicata didn't apply to bar suit number 5 because the subject matter and parties were distinct in both suits. Like under section 11 of CPC, it is given that under which circumstances res judicata could apply. So this is one of the exception given under res judicata, like when the subject matter and parties were distinct in both the suits, no matter it is related to some or the other way, in those cases the principle of res judicata wouldn't apply. 5. The Supreme Court in the Ayodhya title dispute case stated that the Nirmohi Akhara in effect claim as she-beds in service of the deity. That means it actually in effect claim as a custody in service of the deity. Which of the following most accurately describe the meaning of the term she-bed? So what do we mean by she-bed? It means option number B, the human agency that discharges the role of managing the properties of arranging for the performance of ceremonies associated with worship and taking steps to protect the endowment inter alia by bringing proceedings on behalf of a Hindu idol recognized by courts as having a juristic personality. That means any human agency which have control or supervision of the management of any religious place or associated with worship or taking steps to protect the endowment, etc. Question number 6. Upon which of the following cases did the Supreme Court rely in the Ayodhya title dispute case to hold that a stray act or intermittent acts of management do not vest a person with the rights of a de facto she-bed? So on this point, while holding this opinion, the Supreme Court actually relied the judgment of Shankar Narayanan Iyer versus Puvanantha Swami Temple, which was decided in the year 1940. Sorry, it was a case of 1949. Seventh, in its orders in the Ayodhya title dispute case, the Supreme Court directed that the central government shall, within a period of 3 months from the date of this judgment, formulate a scheme pursuant to the powers vested in it under section 6 and 7 of each of the following legislation. So the Supreme Court has actually given direction under section 6 and 7 of acquisition of certain area of Ayodhya Act, in which the Supreme Court held that its order shall be followed within a period of 3 months from the date of this judgment, or formulate a scheme pursuant to which power vested in it under section 6 and 7. Question number 8. Upon which of the following cases did the Supreme Court rely in the Ayodhya title dispute case for the disposition that the conferral of legal personality on immovable property could lead to the property losing its character as immovable property? So, while holding this view, the Supreme Court actually relied on the judgment of the Mosque Masjid Shahid Ganj versus Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandak Committee 1940 case. Question number 9. Which among the following provisions of the Constitution of India 1949 were quoted by the Supreme Court in the Ayodhya title dispute case as evidencing a line of continuity with respect to the change of legal regime between the British sovereign and the Republic of India? So while holding the the view of a line of continuity, the Supreme Court actually referred to 2 articles. Article 372, continuance in force of existing laws and their adoption, and Article 296, property accruing by estate lapse or as a bona vacantia. The correct option is option number C. Question number 10. In its orders in the Ayodhya title dispute case, the Supreme Court directed that in the scheme to be framed by the central government, appropriate representation may be given in the trust or body to which of the following? So the correct option is option number B. It actually Supreme Court actually directed for a scheme to be framed, and a trust or body is the status of trust or body actually be given to Nirmohi Akhara in option number B. So that is the reason why I told you, because in most of the questions you would find that the answers are not given in the passage itself. So this is actually the tricky part of this exam, because you have to apply your intelligence and your knowledge in solving this question when the passage is totally different from the question asked. So that is the reason why I would say it's moderate to high moderate level. That is my opinion. Passage 3. The state's obligation is to undertake the emancipation of the deprived section of the community and eradicate inequalities when the reservation creates inequalities within the reserved castes itself. It is required to be so. Okay, so this passage has been taken from the judgment of the state of Punjab and others versus Davinder Singh and others. So this judgment is actually 4 weeks. 4 weeks back the judgment was delivered. This is a fresh case. And I have already discussed this judgment, like I told you, like while discussing the important questions of DULM entrance test for the upcoming 2020. Of course, the exam has already been over. I explained this case laws over there because I thought of it important from the point of view of examination. Passage 3. The state's obligation is to undertake the emancipation of the deprived section of the community and eradicate inequalities. When the reservation creates inequalities within the reserved caste itself, it is required to be taken care by the state, making sub-classification and adopting a distributive justice method so that state largesse doesn't concentrate in few hands and equal justice to all is provided. So what the Supreme Court is actually supporting, that even reservation can be created amongst scheduled caste and scheduled tribes if the reservation is actually benefiting few sections in the category of scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, and also telling that state is in a free hand in adopting a distributive justice. That means it is actually permitting the state to create sub-classification among the already established classes. 43. Providing a percentage of the reservation within permissible limit is within the powers of the state legislature. Like I've already told you, it tells you that percentage of the reservation is within the, means states have the discretion that whether to offer reservation to which category of people. It cannot be deprived of its concomitant power to make reasonable classification within the particular class of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and socially and educationally backward classes without depriving others in the list. So it is telling that even states can also make sub-classification among the already laid down or say already given classification. It can also make a sub-classification among them. To achieve the real purpose of reservation within constitutional dynamics, needy can always be given, otherwise it would mean that inequality being perpetuated within the class if preferential classification is not made, ensuring benefit to all. So here the Supreme Court is also advocating the concept of preferential classification to those classes of people who are not actually benefited from the from the advantage of reservation. So, and that's what the Supreme Court is actually telling. The sub-classification is to achieve the very purpose as envisaged in the original classification itself, and based thereupon evolve the very concept of reservation. So, to achieve the purpose means to remove, to avoid inequality or to provide preferential treatment to the needy people. Sub-classification is the very purpose among the original classification itself. Whether the sub-classification would be a further extension of the principle of shared dynamics is the question to be considered authoritatively by the court. So let us see what are the questions. Which article of the Constitution of India 1949, the Constitution provides that the President may, with respect to any state or union territory and where it is a state, after consultation with the governor thereof by public notification, specify the castes, races or tribes or parts of or groups within castes, races or tribes which shall for the purposes of the Constitution be deemed to be scheduled castes in relation to that state or union as the case may be. So the correct option is option number C, Article 341. What the question is actually asking, that the President has the power to add or delete these or to specify the castes among scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So the correct, so it's actually, you know, telling the, it's actually the article is actually dealing with the presidential list of classifications amongst SCs and STs. Question number 2. Which of the following was not amongst the list of issues framed by the Supreme Court in the so and so case, the present case? So the correct option is option number B, whether the decision in Prem Singh versus Birbal is required to be revisited. See, other two options are actually the issues involved in the present case, but Prem Singh Birbal case was actually not an issue in the case of Davinder Singh. Article 338 of the Constitution of India provides for the formation which among the following. So it actually provides for the establishment of National Commission for the Scheduled Castes. Article 338. Article 338A deals with National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, and Article 338B deals with National Commission for Backward Classes. Question number 4. The judgment in the Davinder Singh case states Article 342A's provisions are pari materia to Article 341 and 342 dealing with Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. What does the expression pari materia means? So pari materia actually means on the same subject or matter. Question number 5. In the Davinder Singh's case, the Supreme Court referred to the case of K.C. Vasantakumar and another versus State of Karnataka, which distinguished the case of Mr. Balaji and other versus State of Mysore, and held that. So what it actually held that? It held that the sub-classification between backward and more backward classes may be permissible to help more backward classes. So in overall it means the sub-classification is also permissible among the backward and more backward classes to help the more backward classes to benefit from the reservation and to, you know, to maintain the concept of equality. 6. Article 342A of the Constitution states 342A, socially and educationally backward classes. What it means actually? The President may, with respect to any state or union territory and where it is a state, after consultation with the governor thereof, by public notification specify the socially and educationally backward classes, which shall for the purposes of this constitution be deemed to be socially and educationally backward classes in relation to that state or union territory as the case may be. Parliament may by law include in or exclude from the central list of socially and educationally backward classes specified in a notification issued under clause 1 any social and educationally backward class, but same as aforesaid a notification issued under the said clause shall not be varied by any subsequent notification. So actually this article provides for socially and educationally backward classes. So what is the question? 342A was introduced into the constitution by option number C, the Constitution 102nd Amendment Act 2018. So what they are actually asking, see, they have given, you know, I mean a big para, I mean the entire article of 342A, no not entire, and they are asking you just a small question like by which amendment article through 342A was added. So the question is actually very simple, but to waste your time or to confuse your mind, they have given this big para to, you know, to bewilder you. Question number 7. The validity of the Punjab Act was in question before the Supreme Court in the Davinder Singh case. The Punjab Act stipulated that 50% of the vacancies of the quota reserved for scheduled castes in direct recruitment shall be offered to which among the following communities. So this, by this case, it was actually, you know, it was actually challenged that these two communities, Balmikis and Mazhabi Sikhs, shall be given reservation within the 50% of, I mean the the permissible category of reservation. This was the issue before the Supreme Court. Question number 8. In the Davinder Singh case, which of the following cases did the Supreme Court say was crystal clear that the creamy layer concept can be applied to scheduled castes as well as scheduled tribes? So the correct option is option number. So see, in Jarnail Singh and others versus Lakshmi Narayan Gupta, this case has been decided just 2 years back. So in this case, a creamy layer concept was actually applied by the Supreme Court in reservation to scheduled castes as well as scheduled tribes community. 9th, the case referred to in the answer to the preceding question held that one of the following cases did not need to be referred to a 7-judge bench. Identify the case. So the correct option is option number A, M. Nagaraj and others versus Union of India and others. Okay, so in this judgment the court actually said that this case need not be referred to a 7-judge bench for a revisit. 10. Why according to the bench in the Davinder Singh case could it not revisit the case of E.V. Chinnaiya versus State of Andhra Pradesh and others, the Chinnaiya case also famously known as? See, because the Chinnaiya case was a coordinate strength. Let us understand what do you mean by coordinate strength. Like this judgment, the Davinder case judgment and the Chinnaiya case judgment, both have been decided by the same member judge. So that is the reason why the Supreme Court actually did not revisit the judgment, because they both are of same strength, that means coordinate strength. And by this the Supreme Court actually, you know, referred this Chinnaiya judgment to a larger bench for a revisit. 11. So this is the end of the slides. I hope you all like this session. Kindly feel free to share your feedback, comments, queries, doubts, if any, in the comment section below. I would be happy to answer all your queries. So I have discussed this paper in detail. This is the latest edition of LLM entrance test. Many people must have appeared in this exam. The question was not of very difficult in nature, but here the paper was technical and a bit confusing too. So I hope you, whoever have appeared, for this paper, have written well and good. No problem, this is the first time you are appearing to such kind of exam. Maybe from next year onwards they would change their pattern. So better try next time, if not this time. So with this note, I am signing off. Have a great day.